Let me tell you about the day I had to explain to a bunch of alien hotshots why humans don't need to brag about our kill counts. Because apparently, in the grand tradition of teenagers everywhere, even intergalactic military academy students think measuring their lethality makes them special. The Galactic Military Academy's medical wing was supposed to be a place of learning. You know, where future officers learned the fine art of keeping people alive instead of turning them into colorful smears across the cosmos. Unfortunately, nobody told my students that. I'm Dr. Marcus Henderson, but everyone calls me Mac. 23 years in the service, 12 of those as a frontline combat medic, and now I'm stuck teaching alien kids how to patch holes instead of making them. The Academy brass figured a human would be perfect for the job, since we're apparently the galaxy's go-to species for innovative medical solutions. Translation, we're really good at fixing the creative ways people find to break themselves. My current class was what you might call a challenge. First up was Zara, a Vorthan warrior caste with more attitude than sense. Picture a 7-foot-tall cross between a rhino and a bad mood, covered in natural armor plating that looked like it came from the galaxy's most aggressive fashion designer. Vorthans were bred for war, literally. They considered healing a necessary evil at best, like having to eat vegetables. Then there was Clocks, representing the Hive Mind Consortium. Imagine a praying mantis had a baby with a philosophy textbook, gave it 4 arms and an superiority complex. The hive mind species thought in terms of statistical analysis and acceptable losses. Individual lives were just data points in their grand equation of galactic dominance. And finally, there was Pip. Don't let the cute name fool you. Pip was a squeaker. Which sounds adorable until you realize they're basically space hamsters engineered for assassination. 3 feet tall, covered in what looked like golden fur, with big innocent eyes that had personally witnessed more death than most armies. Squeakers were the galaxy's premier infiltrators and saboteurs. They'd smile at you with their tiny fangs while calculating 17 different ways to end your existence using only a medical scanner and some bandages. This particular morning, I walked into my classroom expecting to teach a nice peaceful lesson on field triage procedures. Instead, I found my 3 students engaged in what could only be described as a pissing contest of galactic proportions. The Vorthan Third Fleet eliminated an entire rebel system in 4 hours, Zara was saying, her voice carrying that special brand of arrogance that only comes from never having to clean up your own messes. 12 billion casualties, clean and efficient. Kolok's compound eyes glittered with what I'd learned to recognize as competitive analysis mode. Impressive for individual action, but the consortium's victory at the Proxima Nebula resulted in 47.6 billion calculated losses across 14 systems, all achieved through superior strategic positioning and resource allocation. Pip just chittered, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd screamed. Numbers are for species that need numbers. The squeaker liberation of the Titan colonies required only 12 of us. Population before, 890 million. Population after, 0. We don't need fleets or strategies. We just need creativity. I stood in the doorway, watching these 3 argue about their respective species' body counts like they were trading holographic cards. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk out, and request a transfer to literally anywhere else in the galaxy. The other part of me was professionally curious about just how spectacularly this conversation was going to crash and burn. "Gentlemen and gentle lady," I said, stepping into the room with the kind of calm that usually preceded either enlightenment or violence. "I trust you're having a productive discussion about today's lesson on battlefield medical ethics." 3 pairs of alien eyes turned toward me with expressions that clearly said they'd rather be anywhere else than stuck listening to a human talk about the boring business of keeping people alive. "We were merely comparing our species' military achievements," Zara said with the tone of someone who thought she was being diplomatic. "Sharing cultural perspectives on warfare effectiveness." Right, cultural perspectives, because nothing says medical ethics like bragging about how many people your species has murdered. I walked to the front of the classroom, set down my teaching materials, and prepared to give these 3 a lesson they'd never forget. After all, they wanted to talk about numbers. I had some numbers of my own that might surprise them. But before I could launch into my carefully prepared lecture about the sanctity of life and professional medical responsibility, Clerics decided this was the perfect moment to turn the conversation into a full-blown academic debate about genocide statistics. "Actually," Clock said, holding up one of his 4 arms in that universal gesture of someone about to be incredibly pedantic, "we should examine casualty efficiency ratios to properly evaluate military effectiveness." The consortium's Proxima Nebula operation achieved 47.6 billion casualties using only 200,000 units across a 72-hour operational window. That calculates to approximately 238,000 casualties per unit per hour. I could practically hear my blood pressure monitor screaming. Zara's armor plates rattled as she shifted into what I'd learned to recognize as her challenge-accepted posture. Raw numbers mean nothing without context, insectoid. The Third Fleet's rebel system elimination was achieved through direct combat superiority, no hiding behind logistics and supply chain disruptions. Just pure, Vorthan warrior strength against 12 billion enemies. That's real fighting. "Oh, please," Pip squeaked, and I swear his voice could give sugar diabetes to a diabetic. "You both think like amateurs. Mass casualties are for species that lack imagination." The squeaker approach to the Titan colonies was art. We spent 6 months infiltrating their society, learning their customs, gaining their trust. Then we introduced a modified version of their own breakfast cereal that caused a small genetic modification. Nothing dramatic, just a tiny change to their reproductive system. He paused for dramatic effect, which on a 3-foot-tall golden furball was both adorable and absolutely terrifying. Within 2 generations, their entire species had effectively sterilized itself. No violence, no destruction of infrastructure, no wasted resources. Just patience and a thorough understanding of biochemistry. 0 squeaker casualties, 890 million target casualties, and we left their cities completely intact for our own use. Plus, we got really good at making breakfast cereal. I stood there, listening to these 3 argue about the most efficient ways to commit planetary genocide like they were debating the merits of different sandwich spreads. This was supposed to be a medical ethics class. These students were supposed to be learning how to save lives, not comparing notes on how their species had ended them. "Fascinating perspectives, all," I said, and my voice had that special quality that usually made smart people stop talking and start listening. Unfortunately, none of my students qualified as smart people at the moment. "I'm sure your respective governments are very proud of these achievements. Now, can we possibly discuss why you're here learning medicine instead of out there adding to these impressive tallies?" Zara snorted, which on a Vorthan sounded like a small aircraft engine backfiring. "Because the brass thinks we need to understand enemy physiology better, know how their bodies work so we can break them more efficiently. Medical training is strategically essential for operational effectiveness," Clocks added with the enthusiasm of someone reciting from a manual. "Understanding biological systems allows for more precise targeting of critical functions during combat scenarios." Pip just tilted his head and gave me a smile that would have been cute if I hadn't just heard his breakfast cereal genocide story. "Plus, it's always useful to know how to keep enemies alive long enough for proper interrogation. Death is so permanent, but pain can be educational." And there it was. The moment when I realized these 3 weren't here to learn how to save lives. They were here to learn how to end them more creatively. "Right," I said, setting down my datapad a little harder than necessary. "So, let me make sure I understand your position. You're in my medical training course not because you want to preserve life, but because you want to become better at destroying it. Is that an accurate assessment?" All 3 of them looked at me like I'd just asked if water was wet. "Well, obviously," Zara said. "Humans might be content with your soft healing philosophy, but the rest of us understand that medicine is just another weapon. You people have never seen real war, never had to make the hard choices. You treat medicine like it's some sacred calling instead of recognizing it for what it really is, advanced biological warfare." That's when something inside my brain made a small but distinctly audible snapping sound. "Never seen real war?" I repeated, and I could feel my teaching smile shifting into something considerably less educational. "Soft healing philosophy? Is that what you think?" The 3 of them nodded with the confident ignorance of people who had never been wrong about anything in their short, sheltered lives. "Fascinating," I said, and walked over to the classroom's holographic projector. "Well then, I think it's time for a practical demonstration. Since you're also interested in comparing numbers, let's see how your impressive kill counts stack up against something a little different." I activated the projector and pulled up my personal service record. Not the sanitized version they give to academy instructors, but the real deal, the one with all the interesting details. "Dr. Marcus Henderson," I said, reading from the display like I was introducing a guest speaker. 12 years, frontline combat medic, 847th Expeditionary Medical Unit. Served in the Proxima Border Wars, the Centauri Uprising, the Titan Colony Rebellion, and the fun little police action we called the Vega Incident. I noticed Pip's ears perk up at the mention of the Titan colonies. Good, maybe he'd start paying attention. Now, you three have been very impressive with your species' kill counts. Very impressive indeed. Zara, your people managed 12 billion in 4 hours. Clocks, 47.6 billion across 14 systems. And Pip, 890 million through weaponized breakfast food, which I have to admit is both creative and deeply disturbing. All three of them looked pleased with themselves, like I was finally giving them the recognition they deserved. But here's where it gets interesting, I continued, and I could feel that familiar calm settling over me. The same calm that used to descend during incoming artillery barrages when there were wounded soldiers who needed my attention more than I needed to worry about dying. Because I've got a number of my own that might surprise you. I pulled up another screen. This one showed a different kind of tally. 2,847 confirmed saves. That's individuals I personally pulled back from the brink of death during active combat operations. Not counting the ones who were just wounded, not counting the ones other medics helped with. Just the ones where it was me, alone, keeping someone alive who should have died. The room got very quiet. Even Clock stopped his constant analytical chittering. But wait, I said, warming up to my theme, it gets better. See, you three think medicine is just another weapon, that humans are soft because we focus on healing instead of killing, that we've never seen real war. So, let me ask you something. I turned to face them directly. What do you think is harder, killing someone or keeping them alive when the universe is trying very hard to kill them? Zara's armor plates shifted uncertainly. Killing requires skill, strategy, strength. Does it? I interrupted. Really? Because from where I stand, killing looks pretty easy. Point weapon, activate weapon, target stops moving. Even you managed 12 billion in 4 hours. That's 3 million kills per hour. Congratulations, you're very good at making things stop working. I walked over to Klux. And you, with your statistical analysis and efficiency ratios, 47.6 billion casualties through strategic positioning, supply chain disruption, logistics, you're basically an accountant with a body count. You made some numbers on a spreadsheet and people stopped existing. Clock's compound eyes were definitely not glittering with competitive analysis anymore. And Pip. Creative genocide through breakfast cereal. I'll grant you points for innovation, but at the end of the day, you just had to wait. Time did most of the work for you. I walked back to the projector. But keeping someone alive? That takes skill. That takes creativity. That takes working against physics, chemistry, biology, and pure dumb luck, all at the same time. Every single one of my 2,847 saves was me fighting the universe itself to keep one person breathing for one more minute. I could see I was starting to get through to them, but they weren't quite convinced yet. You think I'm bragging? I continued. You think I'm trying to one-up your kill counts with my save count. But here's the thing you're missing. Here's the part that's gonna blow your tiny little warrior minds. I paused for maximum dramatic effect. I've saved more lives than any of you have taken, and I did it while people were actively shooting at me. The silence stretched out long enough that I could hear the Academy's environmental systems humming in the background. Finally, Zara found her voice. That's impossible. You're saying one human medic has saved more lives than entire fleets of Vorthan warriors have taken? I'm not saying it, I replied, gesturing to the numbers on the screen. I'm proving it. 2,847 confirmed saves versus your 12 billion? Oh wait, I'm sorry. Those were your species numbers, not yours personally. What's your personal kill count, Zara? Her armor went very still. 47 confirmed kills in direct combat. Clocks? Individual units do not maintain separate tallies within consortium operations, but if pressed to estimate based on my direct tactical contributions, perhaps 200 enemy casualties. Hit. The little furball looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd met him. Personal elimination count stands at 1,247 across various operations. I nodded slowly. So to summarize, Zara has 47 kills, Clocks has 200, and Pip has 1,247. Combined total, 1,494 deaths between the three of you. My personal total, 2,847 lives saved. I have literally rescued from death more individuals than all three of you have killed, combined. The implications were starting to sink in, and I could see their worldviews beginning to crack around the edges. But here's the kicker, I said, and I couldn't keep the smile out of my voice anymore. Here's the part that's really going to mess with your heads. You want to know what real medical skill looks like? What happens when a species that's really truly good at breaking things decides to get good at fixing them instead? I started programming the holographic projector for a new scenario. I'm going to show you. We're going to run a little simulation. Mass casualty event, hostile environment, multiple alien physiologies, limited resources, active combat zone. I'm going to demonstrate what human medicine really looks like when the gloves come off. I finished the programming and turned back to my students. And just to make it interesting, you three are going to help. Think of it as a practical exam. Let's see how those impressive kill counts translate to actual medical knowledge when lives are on the line. The projector hummed to life, and suddenly the classroom disappeared. 1 second we were in a sterile academy classroom, the next we were standing in the middle of what could only be described as a really bad day having an even worse day. The holographic simulation had dropped us into a crash site on what looked like a volcanic hellscape. The air shimmered with heat waves, the ground was covered in jagged obsidian that would slice through anything softer than Vorthan armor, and in the distance, I could hear the distinctive whine of plasma artillery getting closer. A medium transport had gone down hard, the kind of crash that turns sophisticated flying machines into abstract art projects made of twisted metal and sparking electronics. Smoke billowed from 3 separate fires, and the whole wreck was tilted at an angle that suggested the ground underneath wasn't as stable as it looked. And scattered around the crash site were the casualties. Scenario briefing, I announced, slipping into instructor mode while the 3 aliens stood there looking like tourists who'd taken a very wrong turn. Transport carrying mixed species personnel went down in hostile territory. 17 casualties, various species physiologies, multiple trauma types. Enemy forces approximately 12 minutes out. Your job is to stabilize and evacuate as many as possible before we have to bug out. I gestured toward the nearest casualty, a centaurian with blue-green skin and what appeared to be several compound fractures. Zara, you're up. Tell me what you see. Zara approached the holographic casualty like it might explode, which, given her species' approach to problem-solving, was probably her first instinct anyway. She knelt down, her armor clanking against the obsidian, and stared at the injured centaurian. I see. Injuries, she said finally. Brilliant diagnosis, doctor, very specific. What kind of injuries? The bone is sticking out of his arm. That's not supposed to happen, right? I closed my eyes and counted to 3. Compound fracture of the radius and ulna. What else? He's bleeding. Where? How much? What color? Is it arterial or venous bleeding? What's the approximate rate of blood loss? Zara looked at the casualty, then at me, then back at the casualty. It's red and coming out fast? Meanwhile, Clocks had wandered over to a different casualty, an insectoid species similar to his own. I watched him conduct what appeared to be a full statistical analysis of the injured being's condition. Clocks report. Subject displays 73.2% probability of survival based on visible trauma indicators. Estimated treatment time, 14.7 minutes using standard consortium medical protocols. Resource expenditure would be significant relative to probable outcome success rates. That's not a medical assessment. That's a spreadsheet with legs. What's actually wrong with the patient? Multiple lacerations, probable internal hemorrhaging based on coloration patterns, and structural damage to the thoracic carapace consistent with high-velocity impact trauma. Okay, that was actually not terrible. Medical jargon aside, Klux had at least identified the major issues. Treatment recommendations? Recommend classification as acceptable loss and proceed to more viable casualties. And we were back to terrible. Pip, you're on casualty triage. I need you to assess all 17 casualties and prioritize them by severity and survivability. The little golden furball scampered off toward the casualties with what I initially mistook for enthusiasm. I should have known better. 5 minutes later, he came scampering back. Okay, Pip squeaked cheerfully. I've identified the most efficient solution. We eliminate the 7 casualties with the lowest survival probability, use their biomass to supplement medical supplies for the remaining 10, and then eliminate the 3 most severely injured of those to ensure adequate resources for the final 7. Net result? 7 survivors instead of probable 0 survivors using conventional methods. I stared at him. Did you just suggest we murder the wounded, to use their bodies as medical supplies to treat other wounded? It's resource optimization, Pip said, like he was explaining basic mathematics to a slow child. Very efficient. Plus, I know 17 different ways to make the elimination process painless, so it's actually quite humane. That's not medicine, that's cannibalism with extra steps. While my 3 students demonstrated that they had the collective medical knowledge of a particularly aggressive houseplant, I was already moving. See, the thing about being a combat medic is that you don't get the luxury of standing around discussing optimal resource allocation while people die. The Centaurian with the compound fractures was losing blood fast, but it was venous bleeding, not arterial. Serious, but not immediately fatal. I grabbed a pressure bandage from the simulation's medical supplies and got the bleeding under control in about 30 seconds. Quick splint for the fractures, pain management, move on. "Zara, watch how I'm doing this," I called out while moving to the next casualty. "See how I'm not standing there having a philosophical discussion about whether bones are supposed to stick out of arms?" The next casualty was a Vorthon, ironically enough. Plasma burns across most of his torso, unconscious, vitals erratic. The burns had sealed themselves, which meant no immediate bleeding risk, but the plasma had probably cooked his internal organs pretty thoroughly. "Clocks, what's the consortium protocol for plasma burns this extensive?" "Standard protocol recommends immediate termination to prevent prolonged suffering." Wrong answer. "Pip, how would squeakers handle this?" "Ooh, plasma burns are tricky. We'd probably use the opportunity to study pain response patterns in Vorthon physiology. Very educational." Also wrong and deeply disturbing. Amp and fluid line and preparing a cocktail of medications that would stabilize the Vorthon's cardiovascular system long enough to get him to a proper medical facility. The trick with plasma burns is that the visible damage is usually just the beginning. The real problem is systemic shock and organ failure. The key to plasma burns, I explained while working, is that you're not just treating the burns themselves. The plasma disrupts cellular function at a quantum level. Standard healing techniques won't work because the damaged tissue can't respond to normal biological signals. I pulled out what looked like a standard medical scanner, but had been modified with about 6 different pieces of non-standard equipment. So you have to get creative. This little device sends targeted electromagnetic pulses that restore quantum coherence in damaged tissue. Not part of standard consortium medical protocol, but then again, standard consortium medical protocol seems to be give up and die efficiently. The Vorthon's vitals stabilized. Burns were still there, but his organs were functioning again. "How did you—" Zara started. 12 years of fixing what people like you break," I replied, already moving to the next casualty. "You learn to get creative when acceptable losses aren't acceptable." This one was the real challenge. A squeaker, unconscious, massive head trauma, vital signs barely detectable. The kind of injury that would have most medics reaching for the death certificate. "Pip," I called out, "your specialty, what do you see?" Pip scampered over, took one look and shook his head sadly. "Massive cranial trauma, probable severe brain damage. Even for our species' enhanced healing capabilities, this level of injury typically results in permanent cognitive impairment or death. Recommend termination." Nope. I was already prepping for emergency neurosurgery, in a holographic simulation, in the middle of a combat zone, on an alien species I'd never operated on before. Just another Tuesday in the life of a human combat medic. "The thing about squeakers," I said, working while I talked, "is that your brain structure is incredibly redundant. What looks like fatal damage to other species is actually survivable because of your neural plasticity. The trick is knowing which parts of the brain can compensate for which other parts." 10 minutes later, the unconscious squeaker was breathing steadily, vital signs stable, and showing primitive reflex responses. "That was impossible," Pitt whispered. "No," I corrected. "That was Tuesday, and we're just getting started." By this point, my 3 students had essentially become spectators to what I like to call human medicine, the unrated director's cut. They huddled together near the crashed transport, watching me move from casualty to casualty like some kind of medical force of nature, with a really bad attitude. Casualty number 4 was a hegemony officer, one of those pale, elongated humanoids with the extra joints. Someone had thoughtfully shot him through the torso with what appeared to be a military-grade particle beam. The entry wound was clean, but the exit wound looked like someone had detonated a small explosive device inside his chest cavity. "Cloaks," I called out while examining the wound. "What's your statistical analysis on this one?" "Massive tissue damage, probable perforation of multiple vital organs, catastrophic blood loss, survival probability approaches 0%. Recommend immediate reclassification as deceased." "See, this is why I hate mathematicians," I muttered, already pulling supplies from what was starting to look like a mobile surgical unit instead of a standard medical kit. "You people think medicine is about probabilities and acceptable outcomes. Let me tell you something about human medicine, Clocks. We don't do probabilities. We do impossibilities." The particle beam had indeed perforated multiple organs, but it had also done something interesting. The energy discharge had partially cauterized the damage it created, which meant less internal bleeding, but also meant the damaged tissue was essentially dead. Normal medical protocols would call for massive surgery, replacement organs, weeks of recovery time, and probably a small miracle. I didn't have weeks. I had maybe 8 minutes before the simulated enemy forces arrived. The trick to particle beam wounds, I explained while setting up what looked like a miniature fusion reactor connected to some kind of biological printer, is understanding that you're not just dealing with mechanical damage. The particle beam disrupts the quantum structure of biological tissue. Standard healing techniques won't work because the damaged areas can't integrate with healthy tissue anymore. That's impossible to treat in field conditions, Zara protested. Even Vorthan battle surgeons require full surgical facilities for that kind of repair. Vorthan battle surgeons don't have to get creative, I replied, activating my improvised device. They've got the luxury of losing patients and calling it acceptable casualties. Human medics don't get that option. What happened next was probably the closest thing to magic that advanced science could produce. The bioprinter began constructing replacement tissue using the patient's own genetic template, but modified at the quantum level, to integrate seamlessly with both healthy tissue and the energy-damaged areas. Essentially, I was rebuilding his internal organs from scratch while he was still using them. That technology doesn't exist, Clock stated flatly. It does now, I said, monitoring the reconstruction process. Human medics have been improvising impossible solutions for so long that we've gotten pretty good at inventing new technologies on the spot. When your species treats medicine like accounting, you tend to stick to the approved procedures. When you treat it like combat, you tend to innovate rapidly. The hegemony officer's vitals stabilized. Completely reconstructed torso, fully functional organs, zero scarring. Next, I announced, moving toward a cluster of casualties near the transport's cargo bay. This was where things got really interesting. The cargo bay contained 4 casualties from 4 different species, all with completely different physiologies, all requiring immediate attention, all dying from different causes. Standard medical protocol would be to treat them one at a time, based on severity and survivability. Standard human medical protocol, apparently, was to treat all 4 simultaneously while maintaining a running commentary on alien incompetence. Pip, Zara, Clocks, each of you take a casualty, I ordered, setting up what looked like a mobile command center. Don't treat them, just monitor vitals, and tell me what's happening. Think you can handle that without accidentally murdering anyone? We're not qualified to... Zara began. You're qualified to read numbers off a screen and report changes, I interrupted. Surely even warrior caste Vorthans can handle basic pattern recognition. While they reluctantly took positions around the casualties, I was setting up something that probably violated several laws of physics and definitely violated at least a dozen medical ethics guidelines. 4 separate treatment systems, each one tailored to a different alien physiology, all running simultaneously and coordinated through a central processing unit that I was apparently controlling through some kind of neural interface. Casualty Alpha has severe chemical burns from transport fuel exposure, I announced, beginning what could only be described as synchronized medical choreography. Zeltarian physiology processes hydrocarbons differently than most species, so standard burn treatments will actually make it worse. We need to neutralize the chemical reaction first, then repair the tissue damage. Casualty Beta is suffering from decompression injuries. Vegan respiratory system collapsed when the transport lost pressure. Standard reinflation protocols will kill him because vegan lung tissue doesn't respond the same way to pressure changes. His casualty. Gamma has multiple fractures and internal bleeding. Crystalline bone structure means standard splinting techniques won't work, and their silicon-based blood doesn't clot like carbon-based blood. And Casualty Delta is dying from what appears to be acute anxiety. Empathic species probably picking up the pain and fear from everyone else here and experiencing it as physical trauma. I was treating all 4 simultaneously. Chemical neutralization for the Zeltari, custom pressure therapy for the vegan, quantum coherence bone repair for the crystalline being, and psychological shielding for the empath. 4 completely different medical disciplines, 4 completely different physiologies, all happening at once. How are you doing this? Zara whispered, watching her patient's burns literally disappear as the chemical neutralization took effect. Practice, I replied, never slowing down. 12 years of combat medicine teaches you a few things. First, people don't die one at a time in combat. They die in groups, all at once, all from different causes. Second, you don't get to specialize when you're the only medic in a 50-kilometer radius. You get to learn everything about everyone, or you get to watch them die. But this level of multitasking is neurologically impossible for most species, Clocks protested, watching his patient's respiratory system reconstruct itself in real time. Most species don't spend their entire evolutionary history fighting themselves, I pointed out. Humans have been patching up battle wounds since before we invented the wheel. We've had thousands of years to get really, really good at fixing the creative ways we find to damage ourselves. And trust me, we've gotten very creative. All 4 casualties were stabilizing simultaneously. Burns healing, breathing restored, bones mending, psychological trauma resolving. The thing you 3 need to understand, I continued, moving toward the final cluster of casualties, is that human medicine isn't just about treating injuries. It's about refusing to accept that anyone has to die. Other species calculate acceptable losses. Humans calculate unacceptable losses, and then figure out how to make them acceptable anyway. The final group was the real challenge. 9 casualties, all critical, all requiring immediate intervention, and all suffering from a combination of the injuries I'd already treated, plus a few new complications thrown in for fun. Standard medical protocol says you can't save them all, I announced, setting up what appeared to be a small medical factory. Standard human protocol says watch me. What followed was less like medical treatment and more like conducting a symphony orchestra made entirely of life support systems. I had casualties on 12 different treatment protocols simultaneously, each one monitored and adjusted in real time, each one responding to therapies that apparently didn't exist in standard galactic medical databases. Zara, what's your casualty count looking like? Her voice was very quiet. All stable. All of them. Clocks? Survival probability has increased from 0.2% to 94.7% across all casualties. This is statistically impossible. The little furball was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something that might have been awe, if squeakers were capable of awe. 17 casualties. 17 different injury types. 4 different species physiologies. Limited resources, hostile environment, active combat zone. His voice was barely a whisper. You've saved all of them. I checked the mission timer. 19 minutes and 37 seconds from scenario start to completion. 17 down, 0 lost, I announced, shutting down the treatment systems. Total resource expenditure, about 60% of standard medical supplies, plus some creative engineering. Time to evacuation. 3 minutes and change before hostile forces arrive. The simulation ended and we were back in the classroom. My 3 students stood there in absolute silence, staring at me like I'd just performed actual magic instead of what was, for a human combat medic, a fairly typical Tuesday afternoon. Questions? I asked pleasantly. The silence stretched on for a full 30 seconds. In a classroom full of alien military academy cadets who normally couldn't shut up about their respective species' superiority, 30 seconds of complete silence was basically the equivalent of a standing ovation. Finally, Zara found her voice. That was, we've never seen anything like... Like what? I prompted, settling back against my desk with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just proven a very important point. Like medicine being used as what it's supposed to be used for, I suggested helpfully. Saving lives instead of optimizing death rates? Lux was running calculations in his head. I could tell by the way his compound eyes were flickering. The resource efficiency ratios you achieved are mathematically impossible using standard consortium medical protocols. The multi-species treatment algorithms alone should have required a full surgical team and specialized equipment worth approximately 2.7 million credits. And yet here we are, I said, gesturing to the now empty holographic projector. 17 for 17, using basic field supplies and some creative problem solving. Funny how that works. Pip was still staring at me with that expression of dawning comprehension that usually preceded either enlightenment or a complete psychological breakdown. You really have saved 2,847 people, he said quietly. That wasn't just a number. That was each one of them, wasn't it? Each one like this. Each one impossible. Give or take a few thousand, I replied casually. The 2,847 is just the confirmed saves where death was imminent, and I was the primary treating physician. Doesn't count battlefield triage, post-op recovery assistance, or the cases where I was part of a larger medical team. I could practically hear their worldviews cracking. But here's the part that's really going to mess with your heads, I continued, and I could feel that familiar teaching smile coming back. Here's the part where you learn why human medics are simultaneously the most beloved and most feared people in the galaxy. I pulled up another screen on the projector. This one showed casualty reports from my various deployments. 2,847 confirmed saves. That's the number I'm proud of. But let's talk about who I was saving, shall we? The screen populated with species identification markers. Lots of them. 1,247 human personnel. That makes sense, right? Human medic, human soldiers, obvious correlation? Zara nodded slowly. 847 allied species casualties. Also makes sense, we were all on the same side, fighting for the same cause. Clox was following along, probably running statistical analyses in his head. But then we get to the interesting part. 753 enemy combatants. The room went very, very quiet. That's right, I said, letting that sink in. 753 enemy soldiers, officers, and support personnel that I personally treated and saved after they were captured, wounded in combat, or found dying on battlefields. I scrolled through the records. 47 Vorthon warriors from 3 different engagements. 156 consortium tactical units from the Proxima border conflicts. And 298 Squeaker infiltrators from various operations, including 23 from the Titan colony incident that Pip was bragging about earlier. Pip made a small choking sound. You see, there's something you 3 don't understand about human military doctrine. Something that apparently makes us unique in the galaxy. When we capture enemy wounded, we don't execute them. We don't let them die to save resources. We don't calculate whether they're worth the medical supplies. I walked over to stand directly in front of them. We fix them. We patch them up, heal their injuries, nurse them back to health, and then we send them home. Because that's what civilized people do. But why? Zara stammered. They're enemies. They were trying to kill you. Why would you save people who want you dead? Because, I said, and my voice carried the weight of 12 years of combat medicine and 23 years of military service. The moment someone stops being a threat and starts being a patient, they stop being an enemy and start being my responsibility. I pulled up one more screen. This one showed follow-up reports, post-conflict surveys, diplomatic communications. Want to know the really interesting part? Of those 753 enemy combatants I treated, 67% requested asylum with human colonies after the war. 23% became active advocates for peaceful resolution of conflicts with human forces. 8% joined human medical services to learn our techniques. That's impossible, Cloyce protested. Enemy combatants don't switch sides because of medical treatment. Don't they? I asked. Tell me, Clox, if you were wounded and dying on a battlefield, and an enemy medic risked his own life to save yours, treated your injuries with technology and skill beyond anything your own species possessed, and then sent you home to your family instead of executing you or letting you die, how would that change your opinion of that enemy? Clox didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. The thing is, I continued, you 3 think medicine is just another weapon. But you've got it backwards. Medicine isn't a weapon at all. It's the opposite of a weapon. It's what you use to prove that you're better than your enemies, not because you can kill them more efficiently, but because you can choose not to. I walked back to my desk and sat down. Every enemy combatant I saved became living proof that humans don't just fight wars to win them. We fight them to end them. And sometimes, the best way to end a war is to show your enemies that you're not the monsters they thought you were. But surely, Zaro said desperately, surely you must have lost some battles because you spent resources saving enemies instead of eliminating them. I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Actually, no. You see, there's another number I haven't mentioned yet. During my 12 years as a frontline combat medic, my unit had a 97.3% mission success rate. Highest in the human military. Want to know why? They didn't answer, but they were listening. Because when word gets around that humans will patch you up and send you home instead of shooting you when you surrender, enemies start surrendering a lot more often. Hard to fight a war when your own troops would rather be captured than killed. I stood up and walked to the holographic projector one more time. So, let me give you your final lesson for today. Your homework assignment, if you will. The projector displayed a simple message. Human medical ethics. Why you should be grateful we like fixing things. You 3 came into my classroom bragging about kill counts. 12 billion here, 47.6 billion there, 890 million through weaponized breakfast cereal. You thought those numbers made you dangerous. You thought they made you superior. I turned to face them directly. But here's what you didn't understand. Those numbers don't make you dangerous. They make you tragic. They represent failures of imagination, failures of creativity, failures of basic civilization. Any idiot with a big enough weapon can kill people. It takes intelligence, skill, and moral courage to save them. And that, I said, gathering up my teaching materials, is why humans don't brag about our kill counts. We're too busy being proud of our save counts. Class dismissed. Next week, we'll be covering advanced alien physiology and why every species' biology is specifically designed to make my job more difficult. They sat there in stunned silence as I headed for the door. Oh, and one more thing, I called back over my shoulder. Your homework assignment is to write a 5,000-word essay on the topic, Why Medical Ethics Matter More Than Military Efficiency, due next Monday. And if anyone turns in a paper suggesting we should kill patients to save resources, you'll be spending the rest of the semester in remedial anatomy classes, learning exactly how many different ways a body can break before it stops working entirely. I paused at the door. Trust me, after 12 years of fixing them, I know all the ways. I left them sitting there, staring at each other with the shell-shocked expressions of people who'd just discovered that their entire understanding of the universe was not only wrong, but embarrassingly, catastrophically wrong. Just another day in the life of a human combat medic turned academy instructor. Some days you save lives on the battlefield. Other days, you save minds in the classroom. Both jobs have their rewards.